Now we're happy to invite up Suresh with WSP and MMM Group and listen to his presentation.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. It will be a tough act to follow now with all these excellent presentations earlier in the morning and with my predecessor earlier. I've got a very, short presentation, so to say, and I've kind of focused a little bit more towards those wanting to get a crack at the IFIs. And this is what I have presented earlier in the Bootcamp in BC and Ontario, and I thought, oh, I'll just copy and paste and sort of recycle from that. But I would be more than happy, even though Jordan says that we'll have the question and answer later on, but with your permission, Jordan, if I'm early and if there is any immediate question, I'll be more than happy to try to answer that. Very briefly, I've been told to do an introduction on a little bit of a commercial side. As you can see, WSP Global, which is my parent company now, is one of the largest pure play engineering firms globally. It's got all kinds of statistics that our marketing people have gone through and pull out, but they are the numbers. I think more relevant is that I myself, when I describe that my history flows through, I come through a legacy company called N.D. Lee. Some of you industry colleagues may know as a boutique transportation engineering firm out of BC, Manitoba, and Ontario. And then we transitioned into Marshall McLean Monahan and MMM Group back in 2005. And as of October 2015, we became WSP Global. Through my NDLE connection, that is where the IFI link is. I have worked in the IFI finance projects for more than 30 years, but on the business side, more than 20 years that I have had the opportunity of working in the IFI. So I would like to share some of the experiences I personally have had and our firm as a corporation. I should also qualify that my experience has been mostly on the transportation sector, which the earlier legacy company NDLE started with the Asian Development Bank and the World Bank in the late 60s and early 70s. And then we moved on to working through a lot of other IFI MBBs. We have had pretty much global experience. And we also had the range of contracts like TA, TC, and directly selected by the IFIs or through the loan contracts that was being described this morning, through the 360-degree range, or we like to call, cradle to grave kind of a services in those ranges. I was doing a rough count earlier, just to put some numbers, and since between 2010 and 2015, I have brought it in through my unit 55 IFI contracts, a mix of both the direct technical assistance and also the loan projects through the executing agencies. And they average out about $1 million US a fee. So give or take Canadian exchange rate, however you like. So that's the kind of order of magnitude that we have had exposure and experience with IFI. It is a fair statement. When I say why IFI, the attraction is that these are one of the best avenues to access and export services to international market. And we definitely stand by that statement, even though it was explored originally in the 60s and the 70s, but that still remains the situation as far as I see and we see our team. Because among others, it's a very streamlined and transparent selection process. Although there is a discussion about harmonized versus non-harmonized, and we ourselves as part of the industry, ACEC, Association of Canadian Engineering Companies, have had some input onto this process of harmonizing and QCBS versus QBS and etc. etc. We did our lobbying, but it is very much a streamlined and transparent process. So once you make the diligent effort, like the speakers, particularly from the banks and the procurement this morning outlined, you make in this effort to go through the process. It is quite intuitive, and it becomes very clear, and so it helps us. There's less uncertainties, I guess, less unknowns. Probably, I guess, if anything, you might be overloaded with more information overload than not having enough information. So there's a lot of information for you to digest through and chew through to make your business decision. The scopes are, I would say, generally well defined, and of course, like everything else, it's not 100% science perfect, sometimes not, but if anything, sometimes we complain that the TOR goes far too much. They micromanage, they start putting the solution well before the consultant has even hit the ground. So that is the extent of it. They really go in detail as to say, you will do this and you will do that. I mean, again, the good thing is that it is out there for everyone to know what is expected. Sometimes you might say, what, did you have to go up to that level, telling how to, do those things? But that's what it is. And then there is the integrity process that has been discussed. So that, again, the first thing you look into there when the RFP comes out, or somebody from the foreign countries, a local consultant approaches you to become your sub-consultant, you go and look at in the World Bank's website. I mean, it's up there, has there been any issue with that particular entity or not, or who else in that country, and what. So it's very much safeguards from unknowingly getting into those kind of an areas through your local partner, because if I have missed it, or I must mention that it is absolutely imperative that you have a very good local partner to deliver the service on the ground, because there's just no way otherwise to try to deliver that without the help of a local consultant, unless it happens to be one or two experts' input that the IFI is selecting directly to provide a high-level advisory services. Otherwise, to deliver a conventional project, you have to have the local input. And last but not the least, your receivables. And I would say pretty much protected, although it is quite right that if your money gets into, like Hussein said this morning, your money gets into stuck, the World Bank, any IFI would say, what, I'm not a contracting party. You two are the contracting party. I mean, you figure it out why they are not paying your bill, and if you have got any complaint, go to your, I guess, mediation process or arbitration or whatever. But in our own experience, and it may be different rules before, there was a situation in Indonesia during the 1997 Asian flu crisis that our receivable were held up for 18 months, and because of all the, I guess, the fiscal and the budgetary concerns, not because of any service delivery or service delivery issues or contractual issues. So at that time, World Bank did. I have to thank them for that. They intervened, they took over the process, and they paid us money out of Washington, D.C. instead of the money coming out of Jakarta, Indonesia. Now, that may no longer be the case now, or the things may have changed, and I'm also by any means, I am not making a suggestion here that, what, if your receivable gets, you have a bad receivables, go to the World Bank, they will likely pay you. But it has happened. I mean, they have looked at on the merit of this case, because this was nothing to do with our contracting party in Indonesia. This was nothing to do with our service. It just got stuck in the, I guess, between IMF and Ministry of Finance of Indonesia or whatever, and we as consultant were cut for 18 months. So anyway, that's so that gives a degree of sort of assurance that you are likely to get paid your receivable as long as you have done what you were supposed to do. I could not resist having this slide here, the pictures. I think one of my industry colleagues here, Jeff Du, somewhere might recognize that picture of the camel from Urumqi in Xinjiang in China. So IFI is certainly a workhorse, quite a reliable, but there's a lot of risks too. I mean, it's quite precipitous, it's some, and one thing keeps haunting reminding us, working with a lot of stakeholders and the local partners, is that if anyone steps out of the way and practices in a exceeds the boundary of the integrity or whatnot, it will come back at you as the prime consultant. You are a primary contracting party. You need to be very, very careful in managing your risks. And some of the lessons learned as part of those the challenge processes is that there's always an over expectation as international consultant, and I don't know how other industry colleagues find it. I mean, our one observation, and particularly my personal observation, has been that more and more large companies have been recently shying away from doing IFIs because of these various challenges and the issues. Now, again, this is my observation, and I'm sure the colleagues from the banks and others would probably have a counter argument to that, but because there's a lot. I mean, it's expected. We receive RFPs. We say, oh, this is an RFP for managing a road building project in, say, India or Pakistan, or what it is, for a $5 million US. You are to provide one project manager, team leader for 36 months, and maybe one specialist for about 3% months, and you have to have 300 local persons managing entire process. That's very well, the size, build up there. But how is that? And then, by the way, you will be entirely responsible. The contract will not be jointly and severally liable. The prime consultant takes the responsibility. So that project manager, one person, still has a 24 hours a day. I mean, whether he comes from, whichever sphere. That person becomes responsible for the conduct of the 200 local persons and so forth. So that is where it's a two-way sword. Why you need a local partner, reliable local partner, but at the same time, the burden that places on you to deliver the contract in a ethical manner and in a proper manner, it becomes a real challenge. There's over expectation is there, I would say. We also say, as I put it, I'm dealing actually right now, as of this morning itself, in one, I should not name the country and the client because it's an active file. They want to build a 100 kilometer per hour 4-lane highway, but they don't want to spend anything on the traffic safety part of it or design safety, because they say we have no budget. Just design the road. We want to have the movement of the goods, to get there. And we keep saying, you cannot have that. You have to, in order to have the 80 or 100 kilometer free flow traffic, you have to spend time and money to do the safety. But our client is still not convinced, and we have a dilemma. What do we do? Those are the kind of challenges, because they say, oh, it was not in the TOR. Well, we didn't write the TOR, but we drew our attention to in our proposal. Now, of course, they said, oh, your proposal doesn't stand. Our TOR says, didn't say that. That's the kind of challenges we often hear. And also, this goes back to this argument about QCBS versus QBS. Quantity at the cost of the quality, that's one side. But a few years ago, and unless I'm mistaken, I have a copy that ACEC, through Association of Canadian Engineering Companies, had done a petition through, I guess, various Canadian channel and to the FIDIC International also, lobbying against QCBS and for QBS. Here you are trying to save in a project, as a project planning stage, 5% of $1 million technical assistance, which down the road could have an impact of $25-30 million of contract change orders and variations, and maybe a couple of years of lost time. And this has been proven by various IFIs have done their own internal audits and so forth, and I'm sure they have had those reports and the factings come that. And so it still continues to have. It was, I was glad to hear that the World Bank now, with the sort of, beginning July, would be a new framework for the procurement coming. But currently, this is still, there's more emphasis on quantity at the cost of the quality, and that puts us practicing firms like us in a little bit of a difficult situations often. And institutional capacity of the implementation agencies is another issue. I know in most instances there is not enough adequate capacity, and what they now do is that thanks to the internet age and the Google, it's a copy and paste. Your terms of reference will have just about everything you can imagine, from near rocket science to everything, in a place which needs a very, very basic, simple solution. And you don't do anything, at the end of the day comes back to haunt you, saying that you did not comply with that provision of the terms of reference because it's never needed in some instances. So that's one challenge. So if you, whenever you receive an RFP or a terms of reference, I would say please go through that very, very thoroughly with a fine-tooth comb and then raise that, because, and believe me, it's as recent as 4 weeks ago, I sat in one government agency who wants to build a 2-kilometer long bridge, fixed bridge, for a cost of about $225 million US, and they all of a sudden shortlisted 12 firms, and in the 12 firms for a total of $800,000 US. They want the consultant to do the feasibility and detailed design for a 2-kilometer long fixed bridge, and they shortlisted 12 firms. My questions to them was, sorry, it is a bit too narrowed on the transportation sector, but here is the case in point. I said, no way for 800,000 one can design that to a 2-kilometer long bridge, and why would you shortlist 12 firms? That simple answer was that, the more we shortlist, the better chances of RFP coming in. I said, no, that's not the case. That it doesn't work like that. I mean, the World Banks or Inter-American Development Bank and ADBs have spent many years doing research, and they have come up with an optimal bell curve of 5 to 7, what attracts the most number of the responses. Just because you have a higher number doesn't mean, if anything, people will be put off because everybody says my probability are distinctly much lesser. Guess how many they got it? They got 2 back out of the 12. So obviously, had they done 5 shortlisting, they probably might have gotten 4 or something like that, hypothetically speaking. And then again, the terms of reference was an exact case of copy and paste. So we responded to it. We're one of the 2, by the way. And we said, no, we cannot give you what you have asked for. It's just not possible. Even though, like it was pointed out this morning, we could very well be disqualified, but we believe that we had to tell the fact as it is, because we cannot design a 2-kilometer long bridge for that. So we give them the solution that we feel we could do. So that's the kind of a challenge, institutional capacity you got in. There's also, we already talked about the risk with the local partners. So that's one challenge that you need to take into consideration and do the due diligence. But having said though, I mean, like everything else, there is a risk and you got to manage the risk. Excellent suggestion morning to engage in Canadian Trade Commissioner's Office, and I certainly endorse that very much, having gotten their help. Now we have PSLO, we have trade commissioners, and we have OLIFI, and there's a lot of services that we can reach to. And if you are not sure how to go, at least reach out to your PSLO in your province and in your local city, and you will be directed. Again, more and more has been said about visit the country. Absolutely. The local partners we talked about, and forming a consortium at the home base is a sort of another excellent approach. I mean, my own legacy company's history goes back in the 70s. That's how it started. It was not just one firm that went there. 2 or 3 of them put together. They sort of spread the risk, and they were. And one thing that in our company we do is that when we do decline any RFP, we like to give them a sort of our very honest comment, because we believe that we consultants do not, sometimes we shy away from criticizing. And I think the constructive criticism is what we like to give back to them. This is the reason why we do not believe that we cannot respond to your RFP. I mean, I think it helps them. It helps them. Although I think Kathleen is not here this afternoon, but I would have liked to connect, and the ADB has the process. When you have done a project, when you have finished the project, they will ask you to complete the survey. The system actually generates that. But I find that survey very deficient. It only says, did you complete the job as per the TOR? Of course we have completed. That's a post facto kind of thing, it's a very little, there's only one yes and no kind of an button, and though you usually say yes because your project is completed. What would have been desirable from industry perspective is to have a sort of more fields to give the feedback and saying what was the challenges that we experienced on the IFI part or all the executing agencies part, and what can be done. So I don't think the consultants actually do get that kind of opportunity to give a feedback on a project to project basis. So if you are declining any RFP, I think we should give them some comments is what our views are. This is the final comment I would say. Is Canadian consultants, and it came out from the statistics this morning, also are very, very well regarded, known as advocates of participatory approaches and the consensus builder. And this is quite reflective on the numbers. And we ourselves we used to be consistently on the top 3 of the ADB's fact sheets of Canadian firms doing business with the ADB. And when you go into this IFI, introduce yourself as a Canadian practicing, the Canadian entity, you will be very well received and regarded. My second point is that IFI funded projects are, they're the public sector development. These are not necessarily meant to be a high profit yielding sector. And I think Brett this morning put it much more eloquently. IFI projects are for the development of those countries. It's not about the commercial growth of firms, or individuals like us. So we have to bear that in mind. At the end of the day, they are trying to provide potable water to somewhere where there has been no access to water, or transportation access in rural areas in some of the countries, or electricity. So yes, the overarching goal is to help support those people and economy there. So therefore, it is also our duty to, mentor the local service industry. In other words, we create our own competition, and we have to be prepared for the next stage. And this is the case my predecessor earlier mentioned. You try to go to Asia now, you probably find yourself being, you will be outpriced, and because you have provided enough, you've supported and mentored, and you've done enough of the transfer of technology. But so all in all, then holistically, one can say that you have to take it as a sort of long-term, ongoing commitment. If you are in the profession, going in and out on one project or a couple of projects alone might not solve, but. One has to look at it in a long-term thing, which then brings the question of that may be very easy for a firm and larger firm to take a long-term holistic view, but for individuals or the small firms, how can that be accommodated? So that is where the merit of the forming a consortium and others could work. I mean, way back in Canada, I had one fantastic example of that kind of a consortium earlier, but now it's been fallen off. Not so. It doesn't seem to be in vogue in Canada, but whereas Scandinavian countries, for example, I find are a great example of how the the local industries come together collectively, not only within one country, but also among the number of countries, and they go in a very, very aggressive and robust manner. So that's, I think, on my part pretty much. And I don't know, Jordan, how I did with my time, and thank you very much.